Everyone laughed at the divorced cleaning lady until she humiliated 9 programmers in front of the CEO, and the problem glowed on the massive monitor. Lines of code that looked like digital poetry to those who understood it, but gibberish to everyone else. It was a security algorithm that had been eating up 2 weeks of their time and costing the company millions in delayed contracts. Have you ever been in a room where everyone underestimated you? Where your potential was invisible until the moment you proved them all wrong? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She sat at the computer that was supposed to humiliate her, and in 15 minutes, she destroyed every assumption they'd ever made about who deserves respect. The glass conference room at Northbridge Innovations buzzed with snickers and whispers. 9 programmers in designer sneakers and vintage band t-shirts leaned back in their ergonomic chairs, phones out, ready to record what they thought would be the joke of the century. Tyler, the cocky 24-year-old with perfectly messy hair and a trust fund attitude, had his camera ready. This should be good, he muttered to his buddy Jake. Watch the cleaning lady try to spell JavaScript. Angela Williams stood in the doorway, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished concrete floor. Her dark skin gleamed under the harsh LED lights, and her janitor's uniform, navy blue with Northbridge Maintenance stitched across the chest, felt like armor that offered no protection. She clutched her mop bucket tighter, knuckles showing pale against her brown hands. Richard Matthews, the CEO, sat at the head of the conference table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his navy suit probably costing more than Angela made in 3 months. He'd started this whole thing as what he thought was harmless fun, a team-building exercise gone wrong. Someone had mentioned that Angela always lingered near the computers during her night shifts, and Tyler had made that cruel joke about her not being able to spell Java. "Come on in, Angela," Richard said, his voice carrying that smooth confidence that came from never doubting you belonged anywhere. "Tyler here thinks you might be interested in taking a look at this coding problem we've been wrestling with." The problem glowed on the massive monitor. Lines of code that looked like digital poetry to those who understood it, but gibberish to everyone else. It was a security algorithm that had been eating up 2 weeks of their time and costing the company millions in delayed contracts. Angela approached the computer slowly, her reflection ghosting across the black screen. The programmers exchanged glances, some actually laughing out loud. She could hear Tyler whispering to someone about how this was going to be viral gold. But something shifted in Angela's posture as she looked at the screen. Her shoulders straightened. Her breathing changed. The woman who'd been apologizing for taking up space suddenly filled it completely. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the keyboard. Richard nodded, curious now, despite himself. Something in her tone had changed. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like hunger. Angela's fingers touched the keys, and everything changed. She didn't hunt and peck like someone unfamiliar with technology. Her hands moved like a pianist finding her rhythm, flying across the keyboard with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent countless nights learning this language in secret. The clicking filled the suddenly quiet room as lines of code began appearing on screen. "Holy shit," Jake whispered, then looked around apologetically. "Sorry, I mean." "No, that's exactly right," Richard said, leaning forward in his chair. His eyes were fixed on Angela's hands, watching her work with growing amazement. This wasn't luck or beginner's enthusiasm. This was mastery. The programmers stopped laughing. One by one, they began moving closer to the screen, watching as Angela systematically identified the error that had been hiding in plain sight for 2 weeks. She didn't just find the problem, she explained it, her voice steady and sure. "See, the issue isn't with the encryption itself," she said, pointing to a specific line. "It's here, in the memory allocation. You're creating a buffer overflow that's allowing data leakage. Fix this, and your security improves by about 40%. The room fell completely silent. "But that's not all," Angela continued, her confidence building with every word. "If you restructure this part here, you can reduce processing time by 30% and cut your server costs by about $20,000 a month." Tyler's phone, still recording, captured the exact moment 9 highly paid programmers realized they'd been schooled by the woman they'd been mocking for months. Richard stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving the screen where Angela's solution glowed like a beacon of possibility. "How long have you been coding?" "5 years," Angela said simply. "Every night after my shift ended. Every weekend when my kids were asleep. Every free moment I could steal." "Have you ever been in a room where everyone underestimated you? Where your potential was invisible until the moment you proved them all wrong? Tell me about your breakthrough moment in the comments." The silence stretched until Richard broke it with words that would change everything. "Angela, I'd like to offer you a position on our innovation team. Starting salary is $120,000 plus equity." Tyler's camera captured Angela's face in that moment. The shock, the disbelief, then something beautiful spreading across her features. Not just relief, but recognition. She was finally being seen for who she really was. As Richard extended the contract across the mahogany table, his fingers brushed hers. The electricity wasn't just from the victory. It was something neither of them expected to feel. "There's more to discuss," he said quietly, his eyes holding hers longer than professional courtesy required. While Silicon Valley's golden boys slept in their luxury apartments, she was teaching herself to code by the light of computer screens she was paid to clean. 6 months earlier, Angela had pushed her cart through these same hallways at midnight, when the office was nothing but humming servers and sleeping dreams. The programmers' workstations glowed like altars to possibility, each monitor displaying code she couldn't read but desperately wanted to understand. It started with curiosity. While dusting Tyler's desk, she noticed a programming textbook left open to a chapter about loops and variables. The words looked like poetry written in a foreign language, but something about the logic appealed to her. If this, then that. Simple. Clean. Unlike the messy complications of real life. Her divorce had been final for 8 months when she started working at Northbridge. Marcus, her ex-husband, had left her with 2 kids, a mountain of debt, and the kind of shattered confidence that comes from being told you're not worth fighting for. Moving from Detroit to San Francisco had been her desperate play for a fresh start, but rent in the Bay Area ate up most of her paycheck, leaving her cleaning offices while her children slept. The empty office floors hummed with servers and dreams, her reflection ghosting across dark monitors as she balanced textbooks against mop buckets. Every keystroke was stolen time. Every lesson learned a small rebellion against the life that had tried to break her. She bought her first programming book with grocery money, telling herself she'd eat ramen for a week if it meant learning something that might change their future. Then she discovered the free computers at the Oakland Public Library, where she could practice during her lunch breaks and weekend mornings. "Mom, why are you always on the computer?" her 12-year-old daughter Zoe had asked one Saturday morning. "Learning something new, baby," Angela had answered, not wanting to admit she was teaching herself a skill that might rescue them all from the poverty that followed them like a shadow. Her son Marcus Jr., named after the father who'd abandoned them, was 15 and angry about everything. The small apartment, the constant worry about money, the way his mom worked nights and came home smelling like industrial cleaner. He didn't understand that every hour she spent learning code was an hour invested in giving him a different future. The breakthrough came during her 3rd month at Northbridge. She'd been watching the programmers struggle with a database issue, seeing them throw around technical terms that she'd been studying in her stolen moments. She wanted to help, but who would listen to the cleaning lady? So she practiced on the library computers, working through tutorials until her eyes burned and her back ached. She joined online forums where anonymous usernames meant nobody knew she mopped floors for a living. She coded solutions to practice problems while her children did homework at the same kitchen table. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing? When life knocked you down, what dream did you chase in secret? Share your story of starting over. The night before Tyler's cruel joke changed everything, Angela had been working on that exact security problem. She'd seen it on Jake's screen while emptying his trash can, and something about the structure looked familiar. At home, on her ancient laptop, she'd worked until 3 in the morning, testing theories and checking her logic. She'd never imagined she'd get the chance to share her solution. The security camera footage would later show her those nights, hunched over keyboards, learning the language of the future. But what it couldn't capture was the moment she realized she wasn't just studying code. She was writing her own escape. The CEO's office felt like another planet, leather and mahogany, where she'd only known plastic and steel, but somehow, talking to him felt like coming home. Richard's office occupied the entire corner of the 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of San Francisco Bay that probably cost more per month than Angela's annual salary. But she wasn't looking at the view. She was watching him, trying to figure out why the most powerful man in the building was pouring her coffee himself instead of asking his assistant to do it. Cream and sugar, he asked, and something about the way he waited for her answer, actually waited like her preference mattered, made her relax slightly. Black is fine, she said, then immediately regretted it. She actually liked cream, but asking for it felt like admitting she was soft, unprofessional. He handed her the mug, their fingers brushing briefly, and she felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with caffeine. His hands were strong, she noticed, with calluses that surprised her. Rich men weren't supposed to have working hands. So, Richard said, settling into the chair across from her instead of behind his intimidating desk. 5 years of night school programming. That's impressive. Not night school, Angela corrected. Just nights. Libraries, online tutorials, whatever I could find. His eyebrows raised. Self-taught. Had to be. Angela found herself relaxing despite the intimidating surroundings. Community college was too expensive, and I couldn't leave my kids with babysitters. I couldn't afford to take classes I couldn't pay for. Richard leaned forward, genuinely curious. What made you choose programming? Angela hesitated. The real answer was too personal, too raw. That coding felt like building something permanent in a life where everything kept falling apart. That every function she mastered was proof she could learn, could grow, could become someone different than the woman Marcus had thrown away. It made sense, she said instead. Logical. Predictable. You write good code, it works. You write bad code, it doesn't. No politics, no games. Richard smiled, and it transformed his entire face. The CEO mask slipped away, revealing something younger and more genuine. Spoken like someone who's dealt with too many games. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the bay like an expensive painting, but neither looked at the view. Their attention was locked on each other. Two people discovering that chemistry doesn't recognize class boundaries. Can I ask you something? Richard's voice was gentler now, personal rather than professional. Angela nodded. That solution you provided today, it wasn't something you just figured out on the spot, was it? Heat crept up Angela's neck. I may have seen the problem before, on one of the screens during my shift. And you went home and worked on it. Maybe. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Angela could have deflected, could have given him some safe answer about intellectual curiosity or professional development. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. Because I was tired of being invisible. Tired of walking past all these brilliant people every night, knowing I had something to offer, but no way to prove it. Richard's tie had somehow loosened during their conversation, and she could see the strong line of his throat above his collar. When he rolled up his sleeves, revealing muscled forearms that spoke of weekend sailing and tennis at exclusive clubs, she felt that unwelcome awareness pulse through her again. When was the last time someone really listened to your story? Not just the surface, but the struggle behind your strength? Drop a comment about someone who saw your worth. As she stood to leave, he called her name softly. Angela. The way he said it, like he was tasting something precious, made her turn back. Would you have dinner with me? Not as CEO and employee, just as Richard and Angela. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized some boundaries were about to change forever. She walked into the restaurant knowing it was just dinner, and left knowing that some evenings rewrite your entire future. Chez Laurent looked like something from a movie. The kind of place where prices weren't listed because money wasn't supposed to matter. Crystal glasses caught candlelight and threw rainbows across white tablecloths, while soft jazz played in the background like a soundtrack to luxury. Angela had spent an hour getting ready, changing 3 times before settling on her one good dress. A simple black number she'd worn to job interviews and parent-teacher conferences. Standing outside the restaurant, watching valets park cars that cost more than her apartment's annual rent, she almost turned around. Then she saw Richard waiting by the hostess stand, and her breath caught. Gone was the imposing CEO in his power suit. Tonight he wore dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater that hugged his broad shoulders, looking younger and somehow more real. When he spotted her through the glass doors, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "You look beautiful," he said as the hostess led them to a corner table, and the way he said it, not like a line he'd practiced, but like a truth that surprised him, made her believe it might be true. Candlelight danced across white tablecloths and crystal glasses, the kind of place where prices weren't listed because money wasn't supposed to matter. She dressed carefully in her one good dress, but his eyes made her feel like she belonged anywhere. "So," Richard said after they'd ordered, "tell me about your kids." It wasn't the question she'd expected. Men in her limited dating experience usually treated her children like obstacles to navigate around, not people they wanted to hear about. "Zoe's 12, Angela found herself saying. "She wants to be a veterinarian, draws pictures of animals constantly, covers every surface in our apartment with them." She pulled out her phone, showing him Zoe's latest creation. "And Marcus Jr. is 15. He's complicated right now." 15-year-old boys usually are, Richard said, studying the drawing with genuine interest. Especially when they're watching their mom work multiple jobs to keep the family afloat. The observation was gentle but perceptive, and it hit Angela unexpectedly hard. "He's angry," she admitted, "at his dad for leaving, at me for not being able to give him the life his friends have. I don't blame him." Richard's hand covered hers across the table, warm and solid. "You're raising 2 kids alone while teaching yourself a new career. That's not failing, Angela. That's heroic." The touch sent electricity up her arm, but it was his words that broke something open inside her chest. When was the last time someone had called her heroic instead of struggling? "What about you?" she asked, needing to shift the focus away from her own raw spots. "No kids of your own?" Something flickered across Richard's face. Pain, maybe regret. "I was married for 8 years. Patricia wanted children, but we kept putting it off, building the company, waiting for the right time." He shrugged. "Then one day, I realized we'd been living like roommates for 3 years. Very polite, very civilized roommates who happened to share a mortgage." His honesty was disarming. Angela had expected careful small talk, not this level of vulnerability. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be. Best thing that ever happened to me was admitting we weren't in love anymore. We were just comfortable." His eyes found hers across the table. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to actually want to know everything about someone. Have you ever felt completely out of your element, but somehow perfectly at ease with someone? When did you know a simple dinner had become something more? Tell me about your moment." Outside the restaurant, rain began to fall, and they stood under his umbrella closer than necessary. When he cupped her face and whispered, "You're beautiful, Angela," she felt something she hadn't in years, worthy of desire. But as his lips moved toward hers, her phone rang with the kind of urgency that shatters perfect moments. Her babysitter's panicked voice cut through the night. "You need to come home. Now." She brought a billionaire into her cramped apartment where the refrigerator was held shut with duct tape. And somehow, he fit perfectly. The call had been about Marcus Jr., caught with beer at a house party, too drunk to make it home on his own. Angela's babysitter, Mrs. Chun from downstairs, was in full panic mode when Angela burst through the apartment door with Richard right behind her. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Chun was saying in rapid-fire English mixed with Mandarin. "Police bring him home 20 minutes ago. He's in bathroom, very sick." Angela's modest apartment suddenly felt microscopic with Richard in it. The living room, kitchen, and dining area were technically separate spaces, but only technically. Zoe's artwork covered the refrigerator like colorful Band-Aids over their poverty, and homework was scattered across a dining table that doubled as Angela's computer desk. "Thank you, Mrs. Chun," Angela said, pressing $40 into the older woman's hands. Money she couldn't afford but could not pay. "I'll take it from here." Richard stood in the center of the small space, not looking around with judgment or curiosity, just waiting to see what she needed. His expensive clothes should have looked ridiculous against her secondhand furniture and carefully patched walls. But instead he moved through her home like someone who understood that love lived in small spaces too. The sound of retching came from the tiny bathroom, followed by Marcus Jr.'s miserable groaning. "Go," Richard said simply. "I'll make coffee." Angela wanted to protest. Having him wait on her in her own kitchen felt backward and wrong. But Marcus Jr. was calling for her in that young boy voice that still emerged when he was scared, so she left Richard alone with her modest life and went to take care of her son. 15 minutes later, she emerged from the bathroom to find Richard sitting at her kitchen table with Zoe, helping her with algebra homework. He'd made coffee in her ancient coffee maker, found mugs that didn't match, and somehow made himself completely at home. "Mr. Richard knows about animals too," Zoe was saying, showing him another of her drawings. "He had horses when he was little." "Just Richard," he corrected gently. "And yes, my grandfather raised quarter horses in Kentucky." "That's a beautiful drawing of a mare and foal." The apartment's thin walls couldn't contain the chaos. Homework scattered across a dining table that doubled as her computer desk, her daughter's art projects covering the refrigerator like colorful Band-Aids over their modest life. Angela poured herself coffee and watched Richard explain fractions using horse breeding ratios, making Zoe giggle with stories about stubborn stallions and clever mares. The domestic scene should have felt awkward. The CEO of a tech company sitting in her bargain furniture, drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's Greatest Mom," in fading letters. Instead, it felt right in a way that scared her. "How's he doing?" Richard asked quietly when Zoe went to brush her teeth. "Embarrassed." "Scared." 15. Angela sank into the chair across from him. "I don't know what I'm doing half the time. Single parenting doesn't come with a manual." "You're doing better than you think," Richard said, his voice sure and warm. "Your kids are lucky to have you." The way he said it, like he meant it completely, made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. Have you ever worried that someone would judge your life, only to discover they saw beauty where you saw struggle? Share a moment when someone surprised you with acceptance. After Zoe was asleep and Marcus Jr. had mumbled his way through an apology, Angela and Richard sat on her secondhand couch, the space between them charged with possibility. "I should go," he said, but made no move to leave. "You should," she agreed, but shifted closer instead. When his thumb traced her cheek, she realized she was tired of being careful, tired of protecting herself from wanting what seemed impossible. She'd spent years building walls around her heart, until the night she invited him to climb them with her. The couch springs creaked under their weight, a sound that would have embarrassed her 6 months ago. Now, with Richard's thumb tracing circles on her cheek, the worn furniture felt like a throne. Her second-hand apartment had become sacred space, transformed by his presence into something bigger than its square footage. "The kids are asleep," she whispered, though Marcus Jr.'s snores from the next room made the statement obvious. "Are you sure about this?" Richard's voice carried the weight of understanding. This wasn't just about wanting each other. It was about crossing a line that would change everything between them. Angela looked into his eyes, seeing not the CEO who could buy her building, but the man who'd sat at her kitchen table helping Zoe with fractions. "I haven't been sure about anything in 5 years," she said, "but I'm sure about you." Her bedroom door had never felt so significant. Inside, moonlight filtered through dollar store curtains, casting silver patterns across the grandmother's quilt she'd inherited when they had nothing else. The space was small, honest, real, everything their relationship had been from start. When she pulled his shirt over his head, her hands discovered what his expensive suits had hidden. His chest bore a scar above his heart, and she traced it with her fingertip. "Car accident when I was 22, he explained quietly. "Taught me life doesn't wait for perfect timing." His hands found the curve of her waist, reverent and patient. Every touch asked permission. Every kiss waited for her response. This was nothing like the hurried encounters of her marriage, where intimacy had become routine and then obligation. Richard loved her like he was memorizing every moment. "You're incredible," he breathed against her neck as she moved above him, claiming her desire without apology. The woman who'd apologized for existing was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly what she wanted. Later, as dawn crept through her curtains, she woke to find him watching her with an expression that stopped her breath. His hair was messy, his expensive watch the only sign of the world outside her bedroom walls. "I love you," he said simply, like stating a fact about gravity or sunrise. The words should have terrified her. Every man who'd claimed to love her had eventually found reasons to leave. But something in his voice, the way he said it without expectation or demand for response, made her believe this time might be different. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed against the nightstand. The text message made her blood run cold. "Saw the news about your new job. Time to discuss custody modifications." "Marcus." Richard felt her body tense against his. "What is it?" She handed him the phone, watching his jaw tighten as he read. Her ex-husband had been absent for their entire California life, sending sporadic child support payments that barely covered groceries. Now, suddenly, he was interested in being a father. "He can't do this," Richard said, sitting up. "The kids have been with you for over a year." "He could try." Angela pulled the sheet around herself, the magic of the morning dissolving into familiar anxiety. "He's their biological father. Courts favor fathers who suddenly want to be involved, not when they've been absent this long." Richard's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never lost a legal battle. "We'll fight this." "We." The word hung between them like a promise and a question. "This isn't your fight," Angela said, though part of her desperately wanted it to be. "Everything that matters to you matters to me now." He pulled her against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "We're in this together. Have you ever had someone choose to stand in your storm instead of waiting for sunshine? When did you realize love meant partnership, not just passion?" Outside her window, San Francisco was waking up to another day of possibility and problems. But in her small bedroom, Angela Williams was learning that some battles are easier when you're not fighting alone. Just when she thought she'd escaped her old life, it came knocking with lawyers and threats. But this time, she wasn't fighting alone. The law office smelled of leather and intimidation. Fluorescent lights harsh against polished conference tables where men in expensive suits made decisions about other people's lives. Angela sat straight-backed in a chair that cost more than her monthly rent, Richard's hand steady on her shoulder. Marcus Williams looked exactly the same, tall, dark, and charming when he wanted something. The same smile that had once made her believe in forever now made her stomach twist with memory of broken promises. "Angela," he said, extending his hand like they were old friends meeting for coffee. "You look successful." She didn't take his hand. "What do you want, Marcus?" "To be part of my children's lives." His lawyer, a sharp-featured woman in a suit that screamed billable hours, placed documents on the table. "Mr. Williams has been monitoring the children's situation, and recent developments suggest a change in custody arrangement might be appropriate." Recent developments, like her success, was somehow proof of instability. Where were these paternal instincts when she was working 2 jobs to keep them fed? Richard's voice cut through the legal formalities. He'd been quiet until now, but something in Marcus's tone had triggered his protective instincts. "And you are?" Marcus's lawyer asked, though her research had clearly already provided the answer. "Richard Matthews." "Angela's." He paused, looking at her. They hadn't defined what they were yet, not officially. "Partner." The word sent warmth through Angela's chest, even as her ex-husband's presence filled the room with cold. "Interesting timing," Marcus said, his smile sharp. "My kid's mother starts dating a billionaire, and suddenly she can afford lawyers. Makes a man wonder what kind of environment they're really living in." Angela felt Richard tense beside her, but she spoke first. "The environment where they're fed every day, helped with homework every night, and loved consistently, not just when it's convenient." According to my investigation, Marcus's lawyer continued as if Angela hadn't spoken. The children are now living in an unstable situation with frequent overnight guests and exposure to inappropriate adult relationships. That's enough. Richard's voice carried the authority of boardrooms and million-dollar deals. Your client abandoned his family, paid minimal support, and had zero contact for 8 months. No judge will remove children from a stable home because their mother found happiness. The meeting dissolved into legal threats and protective counter-threats, but Angela barely heard them. She was remembering the nights Marcus had come home, late smelling like someone else's perfume. The way he'd made her feel grateful for scraps of attention. The day he'd packed his bags and told her she wasn't enough to fight for. Now he sat across from her, trying to use her success as a weapon against her. "We'll be in touch," his lawyer said, gathering documents. "Mr. Williams is prepared to pursue this matter vigorously." After they left, Angela sat in the empty conference room, feeling like she might throw up. "He's going to ruin everything." "No," Richard said, turning her chair to face him. "He's going to try and fail. Your kids know who raised them, who sacrificed for them, who was there every single night." "You don't understand how these things work," Angela said. "Fathers who show up with lawyers and child support payments they should have been making all along. Courts eat that up. Redemption stories. Then we'll tell a better story." Richard's hands framed her face. About a woman who rebuilt her life from nothing, who taught herself a new career while raising 2 kids alone, who never gave up on her family. The elevator ride down felt like descending from hope back into harsh reality. But as they walked toward the parking garage, Richard's arm around her waist, Angela realized something had changed. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't facing a crisis alone. Walking out into the San Francisco afternoon, they felt like they'd won something. Then the photographer stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, camera flashing like lightning. Richard Matthews and his cleaning lady girlfriend, tomorrow's headlines would read. Their private love story was about to become very public property. When have you had to fight for what you'd built? Share a time when your past tried to reclaim what you'd moved beyond. Love was supposed to be their sanctuary, until the world decided their relationship was public property and everyone had an opinion about who deserved whom. The photograph hit social media before they made a home. Angela Williams, former janitor, current tech innovator, walking hand in hand with Silicon Valley royalty. Within hours, the comment sections exploded with opinions from strangers who'd never met either of them. "Gold digger spotted," read one comment with over 3,000 likes. "She's using him for money," declared another. Finally, a successful black woman in tech countered a supporter. "He's clearly having a midlife crisis," someone else diagnosed from their couch. Angela stared at her phone screen in her apartment, watching her life become entertainment for people who wouldn't recognize her on the street. Richard sat beside her on the couch, his laptop open to similar headlines across tech blogs and gossip sites. "CEO's Cinderella story or calculated social climbing?" asked TechCrunch. "We could release a statement," Richard said, closing his laptop. "Set the record straight." "About what?" "That I really did clean toilets before I wrote code." Angela's voice carried an edge she didn't recognize. "That love doesn't follow economic brackets?" "They won't believe it anyway." Monday morning at Northbridge felt different. Conversation stopped when Angela walked past. The programmers who'd once barely noticed her now watched her every move, analyzing her clothes, her confidence, her right to be in the room where decisions were made. Tyler, the same programmer who'd started the whole thing with his cruel joke, approached her desk during lunch. "So," he said, perching on the edge like they were old friends, "how does it feel to be famous?" "I'm not famous," Angela replied, not looking up from her code. "Come on, you're all over my news feed. From op to millions, that's catchy." His tone carried the smugness of someone who thought he'd discovered something clever. "Pretty convenient timing, right? You solve one problem, and suddenly you're dating the CEO." Angela's fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. The implication hung in the air like smoke, that her talent was somehow connected to her relationship, that she'd earned her position through bedroom politics rather than brilliance. "Tyler," she said, finally looking at him with eyes that had seen too much to be intimidated by a 24-year-old's jealousy. I wrote better code than you while emptying your trash can. I'm still writing better code than you. The only thing that's changed is now everyone knows it. Her phone buzzed constantly throughout the day. Interview requests from tech blogs, gossip magazines, even a morning show producer wanting to book the couple that's redefining Silicon Valley romance. She declined them all. Richard found her in the break room that afternoon, standing at the window, overlooking the city where their story had become public property. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I've been poor, divorced, and invisible," Angela said. "I can handle being talked about by strangers on the internet." But that evening, when Zoe came home from school in tears because her classmates had found the articles, Angela felt the weight of unwanted attention differently. "They're saying mean things about you, Mom." Zoe sobbed against Angela's shoulder. Emma's mom showed her the pictures and said, "You're trying to marry rich." Angela held her daughter tight, fury building in her chest. She could handle being judged, analyzed, reduced to stereotypes by people who didn't know her story. But watching that judgment hurt her children crossed a line she hadn't known existed. "Some people don't understand that love comes in all kinds of packages," Angela told Zoe, stroking her hair. "They think money and happiness always go together, or that successful people only love other successful people. They're wrong, but they're loud about being wrong." That night, after the kids were asleep, Richard found Angela on her small balcony overlooking the neighborhood, where she'd rebuilt her life from nothing. "The board called an emergency meeting," he said quietly. "Tomorrow morning." Angela didn't need to ask what the meeting was about. She could read it in the tension of his shoulders, the careful way he wasn't looking at her directly. "They want you to choose," she said. "It wasn't a question. They gave me an ultimatum. The company or you." The words hung between them like a bridge about to collapse. Angela felt the ground shift beneath her feet as she realized their love was about to face its ultimate test. Have you ever been judged for loving someone others thought you shouldn't? When did other people's opinions threaten something precious to you? When forced to choose between the empire he built and the woman who rebuilt him, he discovered that some decisions define who you really are. The boardroom's glass walls couldn't contain the tension as 12 board members waited for Richard's decision. Outside, San Francisco sparkled with morning light, but inside, the air felt thick with ultimatum. "The media attention is becoming problematic," board member Patricia Hendricks said, her voice crisp as her perfectly pressed suit. "Our stock price has dropped 3 points since the story broke. Investors are concerned about leadership stability." Stability? Richard's voice carried a dangerous edge. "The same leadership that's increased profits by 40% in 2 years. "Richard," said James Morrison, the chairman who'd been Richard's mentor for a decade, "no one's questioning your business acumen. But this relationship, it's creating distractions we can't afford." Angela sat in her apartment, staring at her phone. Richard had texted that the meeting was happening, but she hadn't heard anything since. Every minute of silence felt like confirmation of what she already knew. When push came to shove, billion-dollar companies didn't bend for cleaning ladies who'd learned to code. She'd already written her resignation letter. It sat on her kitchen table next to cold coffee and Zoe's math homework, 2 sentences that would end the most challenging and rewarding job of her life. The sound of Richard's key in her door made her heart leap and sink simultaneously. "How did it go?" she asked, though his expression already provided the answer. "They gave me until end of business today to make a choice." Richard sat heavily on her couch, running hands through hair that had been perfectly styled that morning. 12 men and women who've never built anything from nothing, telling me what matters." "Richard," Angela said gently, sitting beside him, "you can't lose your company. Not for me." "My company?" His laugh was bitter. "I built Northbridge to prove something to myself, to show I could create something meaningful. But sitting in that room, listening to them reduce you to a liability, I realized I'd surrounded myself with people who measure worth in stock points and quarterly reports." Angela took his hands, noting the tension in his fingers. "This is your life's work." "No," Richard said, meeting her eyes. "You are." Before she could protest, he was kissing her with the desperation of someone who'd almost lost everything that mattered. Their argument dissolved into passion, the couch becoming a battleground where love fought against practical reality. "We can make this work," he said against her neck as her hands fumbled with his shirt buttons. "I don't care what it costs." "I do," Angela breathed, even as her body responded to his touch. "Your dreams matter too." They made love with the intensity of people stealing moments before disaster struck. Holding each other like physical connection could solve problems that money and power couldn't touch. Afterwards, lying in her rumpled sheets, Richard spoke words that changed everything. "I'm starting my own company, and I want you as my co-founder." Angela sat up, the sheet pooling around her waist. "Richard, you can't." "I can and I will." His eyes held the steel she'd seen when he'd first offered her the job that changed her life. "Those board members? They think success means following rules written by men who never risked anything real. I'm done playing their game. But your reputation, your connections, will follow me because I'm good at what I do." Richard pulled her down for another kiss. "And because you're better at it than any of them imagined." The announcement hit tech blogs within hours. Richard Matthews leaves Northbridge to start revolutionary security firm with former janitor partner. The comment sections exploded with predictions of failure, success, and everything between. But in Angela's small apartment, as they planned their impossible dream over takeout Chinese food and legal pads, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt like someone's first choice. Would you sacrifice your career for love? When did someone choose you over everything they'd built before? Share your moment of being someone's priority. She went from mopping floors to making million-dollar decisions and discovered that believing in yourself is the hardest code to master. Secure Core Technologies occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse in Soma. Exposed brick walls covered with whiteboards full of algorithms and dreams. Angela stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching fog roll off the bay, while behind her, 12 employees she'd helped hire worked on code that could revolutionize data security. 6 months since Richard had walked away from Northbridge, and their startup was growing faster than either had imagined. But success brought its own challenges, especially for a woman who still sometimes felt like she was pretending to belong in rooms full of people with computer science degrees and family money. Angela called Maya, their lead developer. "The Pentagon presentation is in 30 minutes. You ready?" "Ready." The word stuck in Angela's throat like a question she couldn't answer. Was anyone ready to pitch cybersecurity solutions to the Department of Defense when they'd been cleaning offices 18 months ago? 5 more minutes, Angela replied, reviewing her notes for the 100th time. The presentation materials looked perfect. Sleek slides showcasing their revolutionary encryption protocols, testimonials from beta clients, financial projections that made even venture capitalists salivate. But Angela's hands shook as she gathered the documents. Richard found her in the break room, staring at her reflection in the coffee pot, like it might reveal whether she was qualified to be here. "Imposter syndrome hitting hard today?" he asked gently. "Is it imposter syndrome if you actually are an imposter?" Angela's voice carried the weight of every doubt that had followed her from the janitor's closet to the corner office. "Maya has a PhD from Stanford. Jake was lead developer at Google. I learned to code from library books." "And you wrote the security protocol that landed us this meeting," Richard reminded her. "The Pentagon doesn't care where you learn to code. They care that your code works." The elevator ride to the presentation felt like ascending toward judgment. Angela smoothed her blazer, the expensive one Richard had insisted on buying her, and tried to channel confidence she didn't feel. The Pentagon officials looked exactly like she'd expected, serious faces above dark suits, tablets, and skeptical expressions. Colonel Martinez, the lead decision-maker, glanced at his watch before Angela had even introduced herself. "Ms. Williams," he said, "we've reviewed your preliminary materials. Impressive work for such a new company. Walk us through the real-world applications." Angela began her presentation, her voice steady despite the butterflies staging a revolt in her stomach. She clicked through slides explaining how their encryption could protect military communications, demonstrated live hacking attempts against their system that failed spectacularly, showed testimonials from civilian clients whose data had stayed secure during attempted breaches. Halfway through, something shifted. The skeptical faces became interested ones. Colonel Martinez leaned forward when she explained how their system could adapt to new threats in real time. Another official took notes when she walked through cost comparisons with existing security measures. The beauty of this system, Angela said, clicking to her final slide, is that it doesn't just protect against known threats. It learns from attack patterns and evolves its defenses automatically. Like artificial immune system, observed Dr. Chun, the Pentagon's chief technology officer. Exactly like that. Angela smiled, realizing her nervousness had disappeared somewhere between the technical explanations and the recognition in their eyes that she knew what she was talking about. The questions that followed were sharp, technical, designed to expose weaknesses or gaps in knowledge. Angela answered each one with growing confidence, drawing on months of late-night coding sessions and years of learning to solve problems with limited resources. One final question, Colonel Martinez said. Your background is unconventional for this field. How do we know this company has the stability and longevity to support a long-term government contract? Angela felt Richard tense beside her, ready to defend her credentials. But she spoke first. Colonel, I've spent my entire adult life solving problems with whatever tools I could find. I learned to code because my family needed a better future and I couldn't afford to fail. That same motivation drives everything we build here. We don't just write code. We write solutions for people who can't afford for them to fail. The room fell quiet for a moment that stretched like eternity. Then Colonel Martinez smiled. When can you start? Have you ever felt like you didn't belong in a room full of experts? When did you realize your different path was actually your greatest strength? Walking out of that building, Angela Williams, former janitor, current CEO, realized she'd stopped asking permission to succeed. Success is meaningless if it's built on other people's vulnerability, a lesson that almost cost them everything they'd worked for. The client presentation screen glowed with Secure Core's revolutionary interface, but Angela's eyes were fixed on a single line of code buried deep in the system architecture. Line 847 of the authentication module, a small vulnerability that could expose every user's private data to hackers worldwide. Global tech industries executives sat around the conference table like sharks smelling blood in the water. Their cybersecurity had been breached 3 times in 2 years, costing millions in ransoms and reputation damage. They needed Secure Core's solution desperately, and everyone in the room knew it. As you can see, Richard was saying, clicking through slides that showcased 6 months of perfect beta testing. Our system stopped 100% of attempted intrusions during the trial period. Impressive, said Global Tech CEO Margaret Foster. When can we sign the contract? The contract, $25 million over 3 years. Enough money to establish Secure Core as a major player, to prove that a cleaning lady and a disgraced former CEO could build something lasting. Enough to secure Angela's children's college funds and her own future. But that line of code glowed in her peripheral vision like a neon sign advertising disaster. Actually, Angela said, her voice cutting through Richard's closing remarks, we need to discuss a few modifications before implementation. Richard's eyes found hers across the room, confusion flickering across his face. They'd rehearsed this presentation dozens of times. There were no modifications. What kind of modifications? Margaret Foster's tone sharpened with the suspicion of someone who'd been disappointed by tech promises before. Angela's mouth felt dry as sawdust. $25 million. The future of their company. The vindication of every risk they'd taken. All of it balanced against a vulnerability that might never be exploited, might never hurt anyone. During final testing, we discovered a potential security issue, Angela said, watching Richard's face go pale. Nothing that affects current functionality, but something that could become problematic as the system scales. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Margaret Foster's assistant was already reaching for her phone, probably to call their backup vendor. How problematic? Foster asked. Angela could have downplayed it. Could have called it a minor optimization, something they'd fix in the next update. Could have signed a contract and dealt with the vulnerability later, after they had the money to survive. Potentially catastrophic, Angela said instead. If exploited by someone with advanced skills, it could compromise user data across the entire network. The silence that followed felt like falling off a cliff. "You're telling us," Foster said slowly, "that the system you've been marketing as impenetrable has a fatal flaw." "We're telling you," Richard said, finding his voice, "that we discovered an issue and we're choosing to fix it before implementation rather than after breach." "How long for repairs?" Foster's CFO was already calculating delays and budget implications. 6 weeks minimum," Angela said. "Possibly 8. Foster stood up, her team following suit like synchronized swimmers. "We needed a solution 6 months ago. We can't wait 2 more months for you to debug your own product." They filed out of the conference room like mourners leaving a funeral, taking $25 million worth of hope with them. Richard waited until the door closed before turning to Angela with an expression she couldn't read. "That was our future," he said quietly. "That was their data," Angela replied. "Millions of users trusting us to protect their information. We could have fixed it after signing. Updates happen all the time. And if someone exploited it in the meantime, if we became another tech company that prioritized profit over protection." They sat in the empty conference room, surrounded by abandoned coffee cups and presentation materials, contemplating the wreckage of their biggest opportunity. "We'll be fine," Richard said finally, though his voice carried doubt. "Other clients will understand our commitment to security." "Will they?" Angela asked. "Or will they see us as the company that walked away from $25 million because we couldn't deliver what we promised?" 6 weeks later, the headline screamed about global tech's newest security breach, the one that compromised 15 million user accounts and cost the company $80 million in damages. The same vulnerability Angela had spotted, exploited by hackers with advanced skills. Her phone rang at 7 a.m. with a familiar voice. "This is Margaret Foster. We need to talk. Have you ever chosen integrity over profit? When did doing the right thing feel like the wrong choice until later? Share your moment of costly honesty." They built a company together, but fame and fortune tested whether they could build a life that lasted beyond the headlines. The tech conference stage lights blazed like a small sun as Angela delivered her keynote on innovation from unexpected places. 3,000 faces looked up at the woman who'd redefined what a CEO could look like, their phones recording every word for social media posts about inspiration and impossible dreams. "Success," Angela said into the microphone, her voice carrying to the back of the auditorium, "isn't about where you start. It's about what you build with the tools you find along the way." The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. 4 minutes of applause for a woman who'd learned to code while emptying trash cans, who'd built a company that now employed 47 people and protected data for Fortune 500 companies worldwide. Richard watched from the wings, pride swelling in his chest as he saw Angela command the stage like she'd been born to it. The nervous woman who'd questioned whether she belonged in board meetings was gone, replaced by someone who owned every room she entered. But later, in their hotel suite overlooking downtown Austin, the cost of constant public attention became clear. 17 interview requests today, Angela said, scrolling through emails while Richard loosened his tie. 3 book deal offers, 2 documentary proposals, and something called a motivational speaking tour. "You could write a hell of a book," Richard said, sitting beside her on the king-size bed that felt too big after months of falling asleep in her small apartment. "When?" "Between board meetings and parent-teacher conferences." Angela set her phone aside with a sigh. "Zoe asked me yesterday if I was famous now. I didn't know how to answer." Fame was a strange thing to navigate. Angela's story had become shorthand for American dreams and second chances, but living inside that story meant every mistake became public property, every success analyzed for its broader meaning about race, class, and opportunity. "The Forbes interview wants to focus on our relationship," Richard said carefully. "How we balance business partnership with personal connection." Angela's laugh held no humor, because that's what they really want to know about. Not the code I write or the company I run, but how I manage to be successful while dating a white man. The questions always circled back to their romance, as if Angela's technical innovations were less interesting than her love life. Every profile mentioned how they'd met. Every photo caption included some variation of cleaning lady turned CEO. We could do fewer interviews, Richard suggested. Focus on the work instead of the story. The story sells the work, Angela replied. You know that. She was right. Their unconventional backgrounds had opened doors that traditional credentials might have kept locked. But success meant living under microscopes, their relationship dissected by strangers who treated their love like entertainment. The hotel room phone rang at midnight. Marcus Jr. calling from California. Mom, there's photographers outside our apartment building again, her 15-year-old son said, his voice tight with teenage frustration. Mrs. Chun had to sneak me in through the back entrance. Angela felt her success curdle in her stomach. How many? 3, I think. One was asking neighbors about you. After she hung up, Richard found her staring out the window at Austin's skyline. Her reflection ghosted against the glass. Maybe we need to move, he said. Somewhere with better security, more privacy. Or maybe I need to stop being interesting enough to photograph, Angela replied. They made love that night with desperate intensity. Bodies seeking connection, their public lives made increasingly difficult to maintain. In the darkness, without cameras or audiences or expectations, they were just Richard and Angela, 2 people who'd found each other against impossible odds. I love you, he whispered against her skin as she moved above him, her silhouette backlit by city lights streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Even when I'm difficult? She asked, knowing their success had changed her in ways that weren't always easy to live with, especially then. But morning brought new challenges. The award ceremony where Angela would be honored as Innovator of the Year was tonight, and with it, another chance for their private life to become public entertainment. How do you stay connected to someone when success pulls you in different directions? When did achievement start feeling like a burden instead of blessing? Tradition says he should ask the question, but Angela had never been traditional, and love had taught her that sometimes you have to claim what you want. The Tech Innovation Awards ceremony felt like prom for adults who built billion-dollar companies instead of dating drama. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across ballroom walls, while Silicon Valley's elite mingled over champagne and conversations about market valuations. Angela adjusted her evening gown, midnight blue silk that Richard had insisted was perfect with her skin tone, and tried not to think about the acceptance speech folded in her purse. Innovator of the Year. 18 months ago, she'd been invisible. Tonight, 3,000 people would applaud her existence. Nervous? Richard asked, straightening his bow tie in the reflection of a ballroom window. Terrified, Angela admitted. What if I forget my speech? What if I cry? What if I prove every skeptic right by falling apart on stage? Then you'll be human, Richard said, taking her hand. Which is exactly why people connect with your story. Her story. Sometimes Angela wondered if she'd become more symbol than person, more inspiration than individual. The cleaning lady who learned to code had become a brand, complete with speaking engagements and endorsement offers. The ceremony began with typical tech industry pageantry, videos about innovation, presentations about the future, awards for achievements that would be forgotten by next year's event. Angela half listened from their table near the stage, her mind cycling through speech notes and acceptance protocols. And now, the host announced this year's Innovator of the Year award goes to Angela Williams, CEO of Secure Core Technologies. The applause felt like thunder as Angela walked to the stage, her heels clicking against marble floors like a countdown to judgment. The podium microphone gleamed under stage lights, and suddenly she was looking out at 3,000 faces waiting for inspiration. A year and a half ago, Angela began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. I was cleaning this building after events like this one. I pushed my cart past rooms where brilliant people celebrated achievements I could only imagine. The audience leaned forward, phones out to capture her words for social media posts about dreams and determination. But here's what I learned about innovation. Angela continued, abandoning her prepared speech for something more honest. It doesn't come from having the right connections or perfect credentials. It comes from seeing problems differently because your life depends on finding solutions. More applause, but Angela barely heard it. Her eyes had found Richard's in the crowd, and suddenly she knew what she needed to say. "I want to thank the man who saw my potential before I did," she said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "Who risked everything he'd built to build something better with me. Richard Matthews, you taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone perfect for you." The audience stirred, sensing something unscripted about to happen. Angela reached into her purse, bypassing the acceptance speech for the small velvet box she'd been carrying for 3 weeks. "Which is why," she said, stepping away from the podium and walking to the edge of the stage, "I have a question for you." The ballroom fell completely silent as Angela dropped to one knee, crystal chandeliers catching the diamond ring like captured starlight. "Richard Matthews," she said, her voice carrying clearly without amplification, "will you marry me?" The silence lasted exactly 2 heartbeats before Richard was moving, pushing past chairs and table settings to reach the stage. His face showed shock, joy, disbelief, and something that looked like relief all at once. "Yes," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Yes, absolutely yes." The standing ovation lasted 8 minutes. 8 minutes of 3,000 strangers celebrating a love story that had defied every expectation they'd held about who deserved happiness. Later, in their hotel room, Richard traced the engagement ring on Angela's finger with wonder. "You know," he said, "tradition usually." "I've never been traditional," Angela interrupted, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted like champagne and victory. "Besides, I got tired of waiting for you to work up the courage." "I was planning something," Richard protested, laughing against her lips. "Were you now?" Angela's eyebrows rose with mock suspicion. "When?" "Between board meetings and media interviews. Next month, actually. I had this whole elaborate plan involving the Golden Gate Bridge and a helicopter." Angela wrinkled her nose. "I hate helicopters, and heights, and public proposals where I might cry ugly tears. So you proposed to me in front of 3,000 people instead? That was different. That was claiming my happiness in front of witnesses." Angela's voice grew serious. "I've spent too many years letting other people decide what I deserved. I wasn't going to let tradition decide when I could ask for forever. Would you propose to someone you loved? When did you decide to stop waiting for permission to claim your joy? Share your moment of taking control?" But outside their hotel window, San Francisco glittered with possibilities and problems yet to come. Angela's ex-husband was still fighting for custody, and fame had made their family more visible than ever. Some battles were just beginning. She'd conquered Silicon Valley, but the hardest battle was convincing a judge that success didn't make her a bad mother. The family court's institutional beige walls had witnessed countless custody battles, but none quite like this one. Angela sat at the plaintiff's table in her most conservative suit, watching her ex-husband's lawyer arrange documents like ammunition for war. Marcus looked prosperous. New suit, fresh haircut, the kind of confident posture that came from having lawyers paid for by someone else's money. His girlfriend sat in the gallery behind him, young and blonde, and obviously pregnant with his 3rd child. "Your Honor," Marcus's attorney began, "my client seeks modification of custody based on significant changes in the children's living situation. Ms. Williams has become involved with a high-profile relationship that exposes the children to unwanted media attention and disrupts their stable home environment." Judge Patricia Chun, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, reviewed the file with the thoroughness of someone who'd heard every custody argument twice. "Ms. Williams," she said, "you've experienced considerable life changes since the original custody arrangement. Tell me about the children's current living situation." Angela stood, her hands steady despite the stakes. "Your Honor, my children live in the same apartment they've called home for over a year. They attend the same schools, maintain the same friendships, follow the same routines. The only change is that their mother now has a career that can better provide for their needs." "And the media attention Mr. Williams mentioned?" has been challenging, Angela admitted. We've taken steps to protect the children's privacy, including security measures for our home and school. But I won't apologize for my professional success creating public interest. Marcus's lawyer stood for redirect. Your Honor, the children are now exposed to a lifestyle far removed from their original circumstances. Expensive restaurants, high-profile events, adult relationships that play out in tabloid magazines. This isn't stability, it's chaos disguised as success. Objection, Angela's attorney interjected. Mr. Williams abandoned these children for over a year. His sudden interest in their welfare coincides suspiciously with his ex-wife's financial improvement. Judge Chen raised her hand for silence. I'd like to hear from the children themselves. Marcus Jr. and Zoe, please approach the bench. Angela's heart clenched as her teenagers walked forward. Marcus Jr., now 16, had grown 3 inches since the custody case began. Zoe, 13, clutched a folder of her artwork like a shield. Marcus, Judge Chun said gently, how do you feel about your current living situation? It's good, Marcus Jr. said, his voice deeper than Angela remembered. Mom works hard, but she's always been there for us. She helps with homework, comes to my basketball games, makes sure we're okay. And the media attention your father's lawyer mentioned? Marcus Jr.'s jaw tightened with teenage indignation. It's annoying, but it's not Mom's fault. People take pictures because she did something amazing. Why should we be punished because our mother is successful? Judge Chun turned to Zoe. What about you, sweetie? I made this for you, Zoe said, opening her folder to reveal a detailed drawing. It's our family. Me, Marcus Jr., Mom, and Richard. We're having breakfast in our kitchen, and everyone's smiling. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Chun studied the artwork, a child's vision of happiness rendered in colored pencils. Richard's in your family picture, the judge observed. He teaches me about horses and helps with my math homework, Zoe explained. He doesn't try to be her dad, but he loves Mom, and that makes him part of our family. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His girlfriend whispered something that made his lawyer frown. Judge Chun studied both children for a long moment. Do you want to spend more time with your father? If he wants to spend time with us, Marcus Jr. said carefully, we're okay with that. But we want to live with Mom. She's the one who's been taking care of us. After the children returned to their seats, Judge Chun reviewed her notes in silence that stretched like eternity. Mr. Williams, she said finally, your concern for your children's welfare is noted. However, this court finds no evidence that their current living situation is harmful or unstable. Ms. Williams has provided consistent care, appropriate housing, educational support, and emotional stability. Angela felt Richard's hand squeeze hers under the table. Furthermore, Judge Chun continued, success in one's career is not grounds for custody modification. If anything, MS. Williams's professional achievements demonstrate her ability to provide for her children's future needs. The gavel's sound was final. Custody remains with Ms. Williams. Mr. Williams may continue his scheduled visitation rights. Walking out of the courthouse, Angela felt like she could breathe fully for the first time in months. Her children flanked her on either side, and Richard walked slightly behind, giving them space to be a family. Mom, Zoe said, tugging on Angela's sleeve, are we safe now? We're safe, baby, Angela replied, though she knew there would always be other battles to fight. Marcus's voice carried across the courthouse steps as they descended. This isn't over, Angela. Money can't buy you a real family. That evening, Richard found Angela tucking Zoe into bed, reading a story like they'd done every night for 13 years. You were right, Angela told him later as they sat on her couch. He was wrong about everything. Money didn't buy us a family. We built one. Have you ever had to fight for your right to your own happiness? When did someone try to punish you for outgrowing their expectations? Share your victory story. 5 years ago, she was invisible. Tonight, she stood before her employees, her husband, her children, and her community as living proof that every ending can be a beginning. The ballroom glittered with Silicon Valley's elite, But Angela's eyes found the corner table where her former co-workers from the cleaning company sat in honored guest positions. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd covered Angela's shifts when the kids were sick. James, who taught her which offices had the best computer access after hours. Maria, whose encouragement had helped Angela believe she could learn anything if she wanted it badly enough. Their faces glowed with the kind of pride that came from watching someone they'd known rise beyond every limit placed on her. 5 years ago, Angela said into the microphone, addressing the crowd gathered for Secure Core's IPO celebration, "I was cleaning the offices of companies I dreamed of joining. Tonight, I'm grateful to lead a company that proves dreams don't have expiration dates." The applause felt different than it had at award ceremonies. This wasn't polite recognition from strangers. This was celebration from people who'd watched her journey from invisible to inevitable. Richard sat at the head table, wedding ring glinting as he applauded with the enthusiasm of someone who'd witnessed every struggle that led to this moment. Beside him, Marcus Jr., now 17 and bound for Stanford on a partial scholarship, beamed with the pride of a son who'd watched his mother rebuild their world from nothing. Zoe, 14 and still drawing constantly, had sketched the entire evening on napkins, capturing moments of joy in quick strokes that made Angela's throat tight with emotion. Success, Angela continued, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom, isn't about reaching destinations. It's about becoming someone brave enough to start journeys. In the audience, she spotted Tyler, the programmer whose cruel joke had started everything. He worked for Secure Core now, one of their best developers, his arrogance tempered by years of watching Angela's quiet competence outshine his flash and ego. The speech concluded with standing ovation that lasted long enough for Angela to study faces in the crowd. Venture capitalists who'd initially doubted her leadership. Tech journalists who'd reduced her to a feel-good story until her code proved undeniable. Board members who'd questioned whether a former janitor could run a billion-dollar company. All of them applauding the woman they'd underestimated. Later, as the celebration wound down and guests filtered into San Francisco's glittering night, Angela found herself on the hotel's rooftop terrace. The city spread below her like a circuit board of possibilities, lights connecting dreams to realities in patterns only she could see. Regrets? Richard asked, joining her at the railing. About what? All of it. The public scrutiny, the pressure, the way our love story became everyone else's entertainment. Angela considered the question while watching fog roll under the Golden Gate Bridge. You know what I regret? That it took me 40 years to believe I deserved good things. Everything else, the media, the criticism, the people who said we wouldn't last, that was just noise. And now I know that love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose every day, even when choosing is difficult. Richard's arms encircled her waist, pulling her back against his chest. The city lights reflected in the bay like fallen stars. And for a moment, Angela allowed herself to feel the full weight of how far they'd traveled together. So what's next? He asked against her hair. We keep building. The company, our family, solutions to problems we haven't discovered yet. Angela leaned into his warmth, watching her reflection shimmer in the hotel's windows. We keep proving that endings are just beginnings in disguise. In their penthouse suite, overlooking the city, where everything changed, they made love with the tenderness of people who'd survived every test thrown at them. Richard worshipped her body like it contained all the secrets of success, while Angela claimed her desire with the confidence of a woman who finally understood her worth. You've exceeded every algorithm for happiness, he whispered against her skin as she moved above him, moonlight painting silver patterns across her curves. She laughed, pulling him deeper, her body responding to his touch with the certainty of someone who'd stopped apologizing for wanting more. That's because the best love can't be programmed. It has to be lived. So what would you code if you could rewrite your entire life? What story would you tell about rising above every expectation placed on you? Comment below with your dreams of transformation. If Angela's journey from invisibility to innovation inspired you, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories about real people who rewrote their destinies against impossible odds. Tell me in the comments which moment of her transformation hit you hardest. And remember, you're never too old, too broke, or too forgotten to write a completely different ending to your story.